Mercedes' disastrous weekend in Brazil was their last best opportunity to win an F1 race this year, and the W14 now faces a winless season. Having won the race at Interlagos last season after capitalizing on a bad weekend from Red Bull, the Brackley team arrived in Sao Paolo as legitimate contenders for the win, also due to Mercedes' recent upswing in form with Lewis Hamilton in the United States and Mexico. However, a surprisingly bad weekend resulted in a single 8th place finish in a race when other Mercedes customer teams were clearly faster, and the team is now facing the very real danger of finishing without a race win for the first time since the 2011 season with the W02. And this has raised multiple questions for the team's future. Are they still the top team who they used to be? And are the senior employees, including Toto Wolff, still the right people to bring Mercedes back to the top? What has gone wrong with the Silver Arrows in the past 2 years? Mercedes looked decent in terms of single-lap performance after qualifying 5th and 6th. However, the sprint race on Saturday revealed a significant lack of racing speed, and as the lights went out for the Grand Prix on Sunday, it was much of the same for Hamilton and George Russell, despite a strong start. Overtaken by Aston Martin's Red Bull's Sergio Perez, Ferrari's Carlos Sainz, and even Alpine's Pierre Gasly, Mercedes barely held on to positions in the top 10, with Russell's position threatened by Esteban Ocon even before his retirement, due to the amount of lift and coast he had to do. While Max Verstappen, Lando Norris, and Sergio Perez all improved on their best laps from 2022, Mercedes were much slower in 2023 compared to their day of glory last year. Russell's fastest lap in 2022 was a 1 minute 13.7. Hamilton's was a 1 minute 13.9, while Hamilton's fastest lap in 2023 was a 1 minute 14.7, a full second slower than the previous year. Sunday was everything Mercedes hadn't hoped for. While this is certainly oversimplification, given the difference in tyre compounds and the sprint format complicating setups, the basic reality is that the W13, as bad as it was faster around Interlagos than the W14. What concerns Mercedes is that they just do not know why. It's totally baffling, unacceptable for all of us, Wolff explained to the media afterward. We are a proper structure and a solid team. That didn't look like a solid team today. Interestingly, within 3 consecutive races, we finished a strong second in both of them, challenging Max. And then a week later, you're ending up nowhere. I believe this is just not on. Of course, one possible explanation for Mercedes' poor performance is that, like with previous sprint weekends, the team simply failed to perfect setup during the 1-hour practice session on Friday before entering Parc Fermé conditions. According to Wolff, this theory does not carry much weight. Sprint weekends generally haven't been our strengths, he told reporters. We're working ourselves out the problems on most weekends. The swings are on, but things are not on from being almost quickest to being 8th. For me personally, the worst weekend in 13 years. So did the sprint format, as well as the US disqualification, play a role in Mercedes' troubles? As Mercedes was caught off guard by a shortage of setup time 2 weeks ago, when they drove the car too low at the Circuit of the Americas. As a result, Hamilton was disqualified from 2nd place, and Wolff conceded that the W14's performance at Interlagos may have been hampered by some additional conservatism. Yeah, we ran the car way too high. That's what he stated. You carry that on, like you say, but that wasn't the main reason for an absolute off weekend in terms of performance. There's something fundamentally wrong mechanically. It's not a rear wing, and it's not the car being slightly too high, because we're talking a millimeter too. That is performance, but it's not the explanation. But how is this possible? Mercedes seemed to be on a real upswing throughout 2023, having abandoned their zero-pod project, which had been troublesome from the start of 2022. A shift in their technical organization that put James Allison, the architect of their successful years, back in control of the day-to-day development of the W14, looked to be paying off as the season progressed. So much so that Mike Elliott, who began the year as their technical director, resigned as chief technical officer only days before the race in Brazil. The sheer uncertainty over the W14's performance in Brazil, however, has showed Mercedes that their grasp of their car and the ground effect idea in general may not be as evolved as they thought. The development on this car is more plasters that we put on something that's not right, he said. It shows that it's so unpredictable that it can swing either side. Being 6, 7, or 8 tenths off is when you just tip over the edge and then nothing goes. A lot of change, but this is our route, a fundamentally different car next year. Today confirms that it's the right thing to do. However, Wolff agrees that there simply cannot be any grounds for optimism as we approach 2024. After all, the Interlagos weekend exactly a year ago gave them optimism that their prior approach was working, only for it to be the car's one and only day in the sun. "We have no expectations," he said. "We know it confirms that the trajectory of changing fundamentally is right. Last year we came out of an Interlagos weekend and you're absolutely on top. You're demolishing your competition on Saturday and Sunday. That was like, are we doing the right things by continuing with the chassis that we have? Now it's pretty clear. This feels horrible for the whole team. I wish we could start the new season by concentrating on a new car. For 13 years, I've never felt optimistic or confident," he said. "Perhaps it's more my issue and my brain. The glass is always half empty. But what we know is that we're changing the car completely, and we are an outlier compared to the last 8 years, where we've been in the front, solid, and with the structure and people to perform at the front." He went on to say, "This car generally, the development of this car, is more plasters that we put on something that's not right. So it's clear they will be bringing a completely new car. However, the obvious issue with bringing a new car and concept means there's still a lot of catching up to do on a team that spent the last 2 years refining the concept that works. After all, without competition, it's impossible to tell how much Max Verstappen and Red Bull are holding back in reserve. So the big question is Mercedes' advancement being hampered by a lack of knowledge of the ground effect within the team? As the second season of the ground effect era comes to a close, it's evident that even elite teams like Mercedes don't fully grasp how to effectively leverage the aerodynamic concept. Lewis Hamilton, who finished 8th, speculated that the floor simply wasn't working at Interlagos, with the reason for this being an evident mystery. Hamilton and Wolff have one thing in common. Neither is especially skilled at masking their actual thoughts about how things are going. Both were full of sparkling hope in recent weeks, having plainly thought that the path that the car had been taken in was the proper one. Race after race, positive results seemed to mark off the boxes, suggesting their comprehension was increasing. But Brazil has undone everything. Despite having mastered the circuit with the W13, the fact that the car's performance did not add up this year implies that Mercedes' understanding is no better than that of any of the other teams whose form has yo-yoed about behind the Red Bulls. As a result, the obvious issue is whether Mercedes, or anybody else, can make the leap to catch up to Red Bull before the chassis changes in 2026. While Milton Keynes was caught off guard in Singapore, there is indication that their knowledge, guided by the renowned Adrian Newey, continues to surpass that of the baffled teams behind. Certainly, after expressing increasing optimism in recent weeks about being able to challenge more strongly next year, Hamilton admitted that he believes the game is up after finishing nearly a lap behind at Interlagos, a result that, even in isolation, shows that the championship challenge may once again be a step too far next year. "Ultimately, all I can do is try to remain optimistic," he said. "The Red Bull, I think, is so far away. I think they're probably going to be very clear for the next couple of years. Mercedes just does not appear to have the depth of expertise in the aerodynamic area that Red Bull and McLaren presently have. With Elliott already gone for the bad result of the W13 and W14, Allison has at least a year or two before pressure mounts on his shoulders. But it's the current aero heads at Mercedes who may feel the heat if the W15 proves as complexing as this year's cars. Mercedes aerodynamics are led by Gioacchino Vino and Jared Murphy, both highly experienced engineers and designers who may lack the old-school expertise of their colleagues at Red Bull and McLaren. The fact that Aston Martin and McLaren were so much faster than the W14, despite using the same power unit, is perhaps the clearest indication that the Mercedes chassis and aero are simply not up to scratch, especially now that Aston Martin has rolled back their upgrades to a previous spec. This is possibly the most difficult test of Toto Wolff's leadership that the Austrian has faced in more than 10 years in command at Brackley. While Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton may still finish second in 2023, it is the shortcomings of other drivers and their general operational sharpness that keeps them in the game. However, the runner-up position is first among losers, and based on the results in Brazil, Mercedes are no closer to unseating Red Bull and Verstappen and delivering Hamilton his record-breaking 8th title than they were a year ago. And judging by their expressions after the checkered flag in Brazil, both Wolff and Hamilton realized this throughout the lengthy 71 laps of Interlagos. So now it's time to come back better than ever next year. If this won't happen, we could probably expect more changes happening within the senior team of Mercedes. Could you see this happening? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. It would be strange to see Mercedes without Toto Wolff or some other senior employees, but sometimes change is needed to further improve. Only time will tell us if it has to come to that.